Good morning. Welcome back. So this is really interesting how this talk this morning kind of came together. Because normally I know in advance, I kind of have an intuition about what the subject's going to be and then kind of over the days like Thursday and Friday I start to parse it out and get into it and look at the stories. But what happened with this one was I didn't know what I was going to do, what the talk was going to be about. And then yesterday, I think it was either first thing in the morning or sometime during the night, I got these words came to me. One was evolutionary leap forward, and I was like, wow, like, whoa, this is great. Like, I guess I'm going to make an evolutionary leap forward. I was all excited. And, oh, good news. And then a word came later, which was cosmic consciousness. So I didn't really even have an idea that that had anything to do with this. And then yesterday, as I sat down, I was like, okay, so what is the talk going to be about today? And slowly, not really clearly, but slowly these pieces started coming. So this has been pieces coming since yesterday, then whenever those first words came, all the way until 3 minutes ago, there's been more and more information coming. So I often will spend Saturday morning just reviewing the information that I put together the day before. And this morning I didn't have time because more information just kept coming. And so I'm going to keep it all today. So this might be a little bit longer than normal because I think it just is so timely. But what also is going to be a part of this is that I'm pulling different pieces all together that are connected. But because this has all been coming through, I don't necessarily have a clear, definite picture of how these pieces come together. And so this is something like possibly seeds being planted that are going to, over time, be expanding in your consciousness and my consciousness. So we'll see what happens if this week I don't get like a ton of information, and then next weekend we'll be talking about this again and like how then what's the next piece of this. So the more that I looked into this, the more I was absolutely stunned by how interesting this is, this particular moment. So I don't know anything about astrology. I know like nothing about astronomy. So again, like it's as I've talked to you before about some other things like religion. I'm not somebody who's well versed in these things, but for whatever reason, certain information comes to me. So you may be like, oh, this is astrology, or this is this, or this is that. But I don't really have that connection. So that may be how this lands for you and the connection that you have with it. So I do know that one of the things that is talked about, I have heard when I've listened to astrologers, is they talk about these 7-year cycles. And so that was like one of the keys that was so interesting about this when I started pulling this together, is that this eclipse in the United States happened 7 years ago, which was, what was it, 2017, and then now again in 2024. So it suggests that there's this cycle that's happened. And so then what I did was, and I'll get into this towards the end of the talk, is that what I just saw was like, holy cow, look how much has happened. Not even, I mean, worldwide, but in the United States. And I'm focusing on the US because to look at the path as an X, like X marks the spot, right? So the spot for what is what we're going to try and unpack and discern and understand. And so it isn't only about the United States because we're all part of the same soup. We're all in the collective unconscious together. So somehow this relates to everyone, but there's something specifically that we can discern about the consciousness that's changing through this cycle. And so I'll get into the details of, I mean, how many big events have happened over the course of this time. So As I mentioned last week, symbolism is a unitary language. It's timeless, it's cyclical. It doesn't, it's as opposed to a language like, let's say, English. It's like if you look up the definition of a certain word in English, it's kind of like, it can mean this or this. Is it a noun or is it a verb, whatever. It gives you like these number of definitions. It can mean multiple things. But when you look at a symbol just has it's like it changes. It can evolve. It can be different for different people at the same time. It's like it's not something that's kind of locked in. Even for one person, a symbol and the understanding of a symbol can evolve over time. Symbols work on consciousness. They have the ability to transform consciousness, which is why we're looking at the eclipse in particular as a symbol that appears in dreams and I'm going to share those dreams that I've had about the eclipse over time. And again, I'm not somebody who would have a frame of reference for it like astrology or and understood that aspect of it or any other. So again, I got seeds and I just put the seeds together, and so it's just basically follow the bouncing ball, like we're going down the rabbit hole. Buckle up, buttercup, here we go. So in Revelation, in Christianity, and as I've said before, it's not about being religious, but we are embedded in a Christian culture. So that means it's the myth we live in. And in Revelation, God says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, right? What are we talking about here? A circle. And so right after that, we have a circle, and a circle is the symbol that's associated with God. So right after that, it says, blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life. So again, what we're trying to do is we're going to put all these seeds together, put all these pieces together and see what is this telling us about the eclipse, even though it may not seem related. Trust me, it is. So then if you look in Proverbs, when we say tree of life, what is that referencing? And so when we look in Proverbs, it says wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. So we could say that somehow this idea of the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning is the end, right? It's a circle. We're not talking about linear consciousness here. We're not talking about like you're born here and you die here and it's a straight line in between. We're talking about the cyclical nature. And so here, wisdom, Sophia, is the Greek word for wisdom. So Sophia is the tree of life. So symbolism as a new language rewires the brain and can be a bridge to new consciousness, right? So if you look at dreams are symbolic, and what they're doing is they're rewiring the brain. Night after night, they're attempting to create new consciousness. So a common themes in fairy tales, so this is going to tie into what we've been talking about for weeks now, which fairy tales are patterns, as I've said before, about the collective consciousness and how do we evolve the collective consciousness on a personal level. So what do we need to do in order to participate in the collective transformation? And the fairy tales symbolically give us the steps to do that. So when we look at things symbolically, we use words like male and female, masculine and feminine, but it really doesn't have anything to do with men and women. We can look at it that way, but it's not necessary. So when we say something like the mother and the father, there's no judgment in it because everything is good. This is the unitary consciousness, it's all good. It's all love. There is no this or that. That's a dualistic perspective, and we're looking at the symbolic perspective. So the common theme in the fairy tales that we've been looking at is the mother is not a factor, right? We've talked about her. She's not there. She's missing. She's silent. She's died. There's like all kinds of, the good mother is gone. So she represents a unitary consciousness where we're talking about community, empathy, love, care, connection, like all that kind of kumbaya, right? It's also associated, she's also associated with the right brain, which is symbolism, but stillness, peace. We're talking about a more interior perspective of life, a more interior orientation, I guess is a better word. Now, the father in these stories we've seen is weak, passive, and doesn't protect the feminine. So, again, this is talking about the culture. So, what has happened over the past several thousand years is that there has been no protection for the young feminine. So, that means she went into the unconscious. So, I'm connecting that in because I think it's related here. And you'll see why as we continue on. So, another piece going back to the Christian piece. So in the beginning, everything was good, right? We talked about this Alpha and Omega. So at the beginning, it was all good. So that suggests that where we're going is back to that consciousness. But the idea in Jungian psychology is that this kind of Ouroboros, unitary consciousness that's in childhood isn't a conscious union. It's kind of an unconscious union. So it's like the fish in the ocean. It's not a conscious union, but that the journey of coming back is what creates the consciousness to come back to the beginning in a new way. So the Garden of Eden, we're in the Garden of Eden, right? And the snake enters the garden. So that is like the egg, and the sperm comes into the egg. So we've talked before, right? There's this, what you see a lot in the fairy tales and dreams is the above and the below and the in and the out. So here you're seeing that playing as well, right? That what's above, which is, you could say in and out, the religion is the snake, or the origins of humanity, the egg and the snake, the garden and the sperm. And so when that happens, you see, so you have the egg, that's the garden, and that's the moon consciousness, the feminine. And then you have the snake come in, which is the sperm, and that's linear consciousness, and that's the sun. So here you have the eclipse. You have the sun and the moon coming together in, in the cosmos with the eclipse, in the Christianity with the Garden of Eden, in conception with the egg and the sperm. So you can see this kind of above and below thing happening here. So once the sperm enters the egg, you have cell division. So it's generativity and the creation of consciousness is what we're talking about. So in the garden, which I've mentioned before, we originally have this, we are taught that the moment that the snake comes into the garden and Eve eats the apple is the fall. That's when the fall happens. But what's happened really is that there's the awakening to what already is. And what already is that duality already had entered the garden. It's just that it was unconscious. There wasn't an awareness of it. So just like the creation of consciousness, the sperm comes into the egg. The snake comes to bring knowledge and bring awareness to the fact that there already has been a fall, because Adam is the one who caused the fall. Now I realize this could be a little bit controversial. I realize I'm deviating from the collective perspective, but that's what symbolism does. Symbolism allows us to look deeper and see a different perspective. So I offer this. Take what you want, leave what you want. It's totally okay. But Adam was lonely. That means he was in lack. And so there also is the other story of Lilith, who was there before Eve and refused to be subservient. She said, we are equal, but Adam didn't want to be equal. He wanted to be superior. So that was the point of departure if you believe in the Lilith. If you don't believe in the Lilith, which you don't need to, even then, him just saying I'm lonely, that right there is also a departure from unitary consciousness into like something is missing. And when Eve is created, she's the helper, she's subordinate, and she's less than. So that means, right, that she is not equal, and she maybe wasn't aware of it. So the snake came and said to her, Eve, honey, you're not aware of everything that's going on here. And we can look at our own lives, right? We can look at our own lives and see there have been situations or opportunities or events where we haven't been equal and we weren't aware of it. We haven't, not that we haven't been equal, because you're always equal, but we haven't been aware of that. And so we've fallen into this habit of what have we been conditioned to believe. We've been conditioned to believe that maybe there's this superior inferiority between the masculine and the feminine. Even if you take it, like I said, not even male and female or men and women, but you just say those qualities associated with those things, which I've talked about a lot before and most people know, so I'm not going to get into again here. But there's this inequality perceived in the culture that can be so embedded because it's been thousands of years. I shouldn't say the culture. I mean, it's been a lot of the world, but has been going on for so long that it's not even noticed. So how is that playing out in our own psyches? Well, your dreams and your life is trying to get you to awaken. There is intelligence in the unfolding of life. Just like there's an intelligence in the stars and the moon and the sun and the way that, like, the looking at the cosmos, there's intelligence there that makes things not run into each other in general, right? There's a pattern, there's cycles, there's things that are going on, and that's what happens in our own life. So our own life, the events, the dreams, the experiences, all interactions are always about bringing us more consciousness. So because Eve was perceived as less than, that's embedded in our the fabric of our culture, and that's one of the things that we have to change. We have to find, where is my power in a particular situation? Am I giving my power away? Where is it? Sometimes we project it onto other people, events, outer situations, outer experiences, money. I mean, it can be all kinds of things where that has the power over. And so through the process, we've talked a lot in the fairy tales, of taking back that power from the places that we've been conditioned that has it. So the apple, eating the apple or the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is that coming into duality. So there's this idea of the patriarchy that we've been in for all these years, and there's the idea that there's something wrong with that, and for whatever reason, which I'm not a privy to, that there's a reason why we entered patriarchal consciousness for so long. Did it speed up our awakening? Did it, have to lay down the foundation and get us to a place where we have the internet? I mean, a lot of people say that's a part of connecting us all in order to have a global awakening. I don't know what the mechanisms were and why we needed to be in it this long, but in our own lives and in the culture, we can trust what's happening and say, what is there a different way to see this? How can we see this differently? If this is all working out for the good, then what is happening now that is taking us to the good? So the eclipse is a union of the sun and the moon, masculine and feminine, solar and lunar consciousness. It's the sacred marriage. And so one of the dreams that I had about this, I was standing on a map. It was a huge map on the floor. And I was standing in the state I was born in, and I was born in the capital of that state, and I was all excited, like who knows why, right? Dreams are kind of wonky sometimes. So I'm all excited, like, oh, I'm going to tell this guy, like, this is where I was born, right here in this city. So I tell him that. And then I start to walk away, and this other guy walks up to me, and he has a solar eclipse, and he takes his hand, and he throws it at me. And it comes and it goes right into my third eye, the sixth chakra. And I wake up and I was like, okay, so what the dream is telling me is I wasn't born here. I wasn't born in this state, in this city. Like I was born when the solar eclipse happened, when the sun and the moon came together. And so what else do they symbolize? Well, the sun and the moon symbolize the soul and the spirit. So when the soul and the spirit come together, that is the birth. So we might look at something like, if we're looking at Christianity again, like when Jesus is baptized and the Holy Spirit, the dove, wisdom, Sophia, comes down. So that could be perceived, he can be perceived as spirit, and her energy can be perceived as the soul coming down and uniting. So that would be potentially seen as an eclipse moment, a rebirth, right? And so that was one of the dreams that I had. And the second dream I had, and so in a way that first dream too was like a correction. They're correcting, again, this idea that the dreams do, which is that they want to expand consciousness, and that would have been a limitation. The belief that I was born, and so the belief that I was born means that I will die. And so if that's not true, if it's the moment of those two things, spirit and soul coming together, is the birth of a child, whatever, there's some other deeper something going on, or the birth of the soul, not even the child. It could have been that the eternal nature of the divine is like that in that moment that a soul becomes more individual. And I'm not saying I completely understand this, but that maybe it's that point that they come together. So what can happen with these things is it just takes time for it to unpack. It's like you get the symbol and it comes into consciousness, and it can take years to become really clear about what was going on. So here's the second dream that I had. So I'm outside of a house, and right outside the front door, and there's a rock. It's a big, huge rock, and it's in three parts, right? We've talked in the fairy tales about three being transformation, number of transformation. And so the first part is like this rectangular piece. The second part is the foundation of the rock. And the third part is another piece, which is also like a rectangle. And on that rectangle, it's like these are pieces that fit onto the rock and are like kind of like a lid or something. Like it's a piece that's in place that you can remove and then actually reach into the rock. And so in this second place is the word codex chiseled on that rock. So going back to the first, so I'm standing outside, and there's this rock, and it's in three parts. And so I go to the first piece and I lift it off, and I fall in to a darkness in the void. And when I go into the darkness of the void, I appear inside the house, and there's a couple there. And I'm explaining to them what just happened, that I just fell into the void, and here they are. So then in the next part of the dream, the couple and I are now outside of the house, but now the house is this part of the space is a sunroom that's half above the ground, half below the ground. And so this is a between space because it's not inside the house, and it's not outside, and it's not above, and it's not completely below, but it's in between all these things, which will become even more evident as I tell you the rest of the dream. So I'm sitting looking out these windows, because there are these windows from the ground to the roof. And if you live in New Mexico, this would be like an earthship. So I'm looking down, I'm looking out the window, and then there's adjacent to the sofa I'm sitting on is another sofa where the couple sits to my left. And so again, left is the inside, right is the outside. So I'm sitting there, and there's a tornado coming, and it's coming closer and closer, and it's just getting more and more intense. I go to blink my eyes, And when I close my eyes to blink, it's like this is in slow motion. I close my eyes to blink, and at that moment, in the back of my head, which is the Bindu chakra, open, which I had to look up later. I didn't know this at the time. But the Bindu chakra opens up in the back of my head, and there's a solar eclipse. And I woke up, and I felt such deep peace. It actually lasted for days. So again, this is showing us there is something that is so important about the eclipse in terms of shifting consciousness. So what does that dream mean? Oh, and so when I looked at the tornado, it was day, and when I opened up when the chakra in the back of my head opened up, it was like dark. So because it was like a perfect solar eclipse. So when I first took the piece off the rock, I fell into the void. That was about a spiritual experience I had around the age of 30. At the time, I thought it was a medical experience. I thought I had fainted. I thought it was a physical thing. And what happened was I woke up, and it felt like I'd pulled a muscle in my back. And I felt strange, went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and my face was white as a sheet. So I went to lay down on the floor because I felt kind of strange. And halfway down to the floor, I fainted. I fainted before, and normally what happens when I faint is I just kind of blank out. It's like I go to sleep and then I wake up, but there's no memory in between. This time was different because this time I entered this darkness, this void. And in the void, a voice said, "Who am I?" Another voice said, "I don't know." The first voice said, "Where am I?" Second voice said, "I don't know." Because my sense of it was I was in the dark. Like I didn't know where I was. And I obviously didn't know who this voice was because I couldn't see anybody. And so when at the time I was married, my husband came in and found me on the floor, and he's calling my name. And so him calling my name pulled me out of it. And I was hysterical. Not over the top hysterical. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. But I was really upset. I was crying because I had been obliterated. There was no Pam. There was no, I was in, we were living in London at the time. There was no London. There was no flat. There was no Pam. It was all gone. So I'd entered into this emptiness and was overwhelmed by the blotting out of the ego. So in Jungian psychology, this would be perceived in my perception of Jungian psychology. They would see this as an encounter with the self, like a capital S self. But over the years, what I've come to believe is this is the solar eclipse. That the voice of saying, "Where am I?" was spirit, in that since Pam was gone, the ego, and I see the ego in another awakening I had, was that the ego is the story of me, which of course isn't real, because I transcend like this, which that first dream was talking about, not being identified with the world of form in that sense as me. And so if the who am I and where am I was spirit, then I don't know was actually the soul answering. It wasn't Pam answering, it was the soul. So again, the sun is spirit and the soul is the moon. Okay, I said all that right. And so back to the dream now, the second dream, so I fall into the void, and then I end up in the house. And it took me a while to figure out who the couple were, but the couple was Sophia and Jesus, right? Wisdom, which I talked about as the tree of life, and of course, Jesus, whom you know. So that would be spirit and soul, just like I said with the baptism, coming together. And That was what they were telling me in that dream, was that I thought that Sophia, the first time I consciously was aware of the union of Sophia and Jesus, was around, let's see, what was it, 2013. But this dream was around 1997, maybe. I mean, this my spiritual experience. So what they were saying is, we've been with you way longer than that. And what's interesting is, I had dreams all along before I became conscious of their union. I had dreams over and over again about a couple, always in this like spiritual sense, but it would be like a Native American couple, or one of them was like an older guy and his daughter, and there always was this kind of spiritual tone to those dreams about creating consciousness, and being about, like, one about Easter and Joseph in the dream coat, and there were like always these references, almost always, to spiritual things. So they had been with me for years and years and years, and they were telling me that in this dream. So that was the going in, and then coming out. And then that next part, sitting on the sofa and looking out the window, was in this between place. What is the between place? The between place is the soul. The soul is between the worlds. It's the part that receives. It's the part that the body, the soul, is like an aura. So the body is like a shell, and that also is emptiness. And the soul is like when you see pictures of Kurlan photography, where the soul is like around the body. That's what it is. The body is in the soul. And if you experience the soul directly and are able to experience, which I did, that energetic body, then what you can see is, the time that I had that experience was that our neighbor was cutting the grass, and the way, you know how a lawnmower goes, that the vibration of the soul, the energy, was in harmony with the lawnmower. It was so interesting. And then at that particular moment, when I was having that experience, my as I said, I was married. My husband was on the one of those exercise machines, and he was having runner's high in that same moment. So we're all connected, and when you have these experiences, you begin to see how it all can affect everything else. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of a sidetrack. So the couple then is the sacred union, the sacred marriage, the union of the divine and feminine, which we have talked about in the fairy tales, and most specifically in Psyche and Amor, right? Where Psyche is the soul and Amor is the god of love, and they are uniting, and she becomes aware of her immortality at that point. So the sunroom is a between place, and it is, we are, in terms of the soul as a between place, we are a conduit for spirit to manifest into form. So like when you talk about being a channel, right, you're a conduit then for things to come into manifestation. So again, that's the between place. The tornado represents a conflict of opposites. So when you have a conflict of opposites in your life, and you sit with it, and you allow it, and you're patient, sometimes you can pierce the veil, and you can go through. Jung talked about the transcendent function and being able to hold the tension of the opposites. And so when you really are able to hold the tension of the opposites, and what you'll see as you work on your own consciousness is you'll see, like, you'll be working on something, and you'll be like working one way, and then you all of a sudden you'll be like, oh my God, like there's the exact opposite. Like, I want to leave and I want to stay. I want up and I want down. Like, it's crazy. Like you often can see that you are in consciousness having both sides, and holding that tension of both of those creates the space for the third thing to emerge. This is like the union of the masculine and the feminine. And when that happens, you have a child. So that's the exact same thing as this. So in this dream, I'm holding the tension essentially of this intensity building, which can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. Not always the easiest thing to do, quite easy to say. So the tornado is that conflict and staying with it until something new happens, which opened up that Bindu chakra, that third eye, which I learned about from the dream. I had to look it up. It took a while to find it, but and then what's interesting about this is, I'm going to read this to you, so I'm probably not going to be looking up too much, but when you make the two one, right, the solar eclipse, the single eye in the back of the head, the two eyes in the front, when you make the two one, when you make the inner as the outer and the upper as the lower, when you make the male and female into a single one, so that the male shall not be male and the female shall not be female, then you will enter the kingdom. That's the Gospel of Thomas. Isn't that cool? Right? So this, we're talking about this between place. So again, it's like not seeing a male as male, but you're actually identifying. What often happens is we kind of get caught up in the identity of the form and the story of the form and the ways that we take on things like a religious belief or whatever, cultural beliefs that limit us because we're not the story. So it's really about transcending that story. You're not male, you're not female, because that's a part of the body. The soul doesn't have that identity with sexuality that the body does, which I believe is why we're going through what we're going through, because breaking down of gender identity is a part of the evolution of consciousness. In fairy tales, what one of the Jungian analysts said was, really in an ideal fairy tale, when a baby was born, it would be male and female. Like, you wouldn't have, the way they have to do it is they have twins in the fairy tales. That's the only way they can show it. But she said ideally it would be that they would be one being with both, making the two one. See, not interesting? So another aspect of this would be the Ouroboros. That's another way to see this, and that's where the two become one. You could see it kind of like as the yin and yang. That would be like another way. Oops. So this is the Ouroboros. This is what that looks like. And so you have, this is the winged dragon or serpent, salamander, and then the one without the wings, and that would be the below, right, because it walks on the earth, and this would be the above because it flies in the air. So that represents the union of those two things. And here you can see, I actually had one on my front step one day, which was crazy. It was it was like November, cold, and my dog wanted to go to the bathroom. And yeah, I'll tell you what this is. So this is two slugs. This is the head, tail, and an egg. And it was big. So he wanted to go to the bathroom. We walk out the front door, and there's this thing. I thought it was a dog had done its business on our sidewalk. It's all shiny and yeah, like it had just, happened. And I bent over and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, like that's crazy. Like, first of all, it was like, November, it was cold. It wasn't like the middle of summer, which is when you would expect to see, a slug's maybe having babies. And then I looked it up when I went back upstairs. Well, first I went back upstairs, got my phone, came down, took a picture. Second, I went up and when the dog was done and looked on the internet, and I was like, this just completely defies like everything that it said about slugs and and eggs, and where they, like, how on earth did these two things move this onto the sidewalk? Like, yeah, the whole thing was like kind of over the top crazy. But anyway, so an Ouroboros is the union of opposites, right? The up above and the below. It's another symbol that's associated with that. And traditionally, the in terms of the winged and wingless, it's about balance. So in order in the fairy tales for the masculine and the feminine to unite, there has to be equality. It can't happen unless they're equal. If they're not equal, then, like, because what a lot of people say is that the prince rescued the princess, but it doesn't work that way. It can't, because they're not equal. You can't have that kind of happily ever after, which represents the kingdom. The kingdom is here. It's the kingdom is at hand. That's what you hear in Christianity. You must become like a child to enter the kingdom. So that's stripping away all these identifications and all these projections and all these things that we've been identified with, in order to come back to that innocent consciousness, like that child consciousness. So one of the realizations that I had was the nature of the universe as all love. So I had an experience with someone, and they did something that most would consider like not very nice, and I was doing this where I was sitting with it and processing it, and I went through the whole experience of processing. And when I came to the end and sat with it, that's like that conflict and sitting with the conflict. And once I did that, what happened was the veil parted, and I realized that it was love, and that the reason he did what he did was because he loved me so much, not consciously, but in an unconscious sense, in an unconscious, subconscious way. He was choosing to be unconscious in order to help me become more conscious. And I wept. It was just, I have no doubt now. I'm not preaching everything is love, but just offering it because it is a realization that I've had. I have no doubt at all, despite how everything looks, which is where the challenge often comes in. I still have issues with it sometimes, like actually seeing, like, okay, I can fall into it too. I'm working on it, but I can fall into it for sure. So that's just showing how you can, sitting with the opposites, enter into a unitary consciousness. So love, it's all good, right? The alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. So our consciousness has to transform the collective. And when the fairy tales end in the sacred marriage and union, it's the same thing as the eclipse. It's the same thing as Sophia and Jesus coming together. Since this eclipse has happened 2 times in 7 years, it's like a cycle. And so they talk about that, and I do know that much about astrology. So when we look at how much has happened in the past 7 years, it is astonishing. Not just in the US, but like I said at the beginning, just to kind of consider that, the fact that these two are happening in the US, and there's like this X here. So 2017 to 2014. So the interesting thing too is I heard that people are coming here from all over the world in order to experience this. So that's fascinating, because in a sense, whether they're conscious of it or not, my sense of it is that they're going to be like embodying, having a direct experience of the energy that comes through with this eclipse. And then they're going to go wherever they are, and they're going to be like carriers of that consciousness that is coming through. So big events are like dreams of the culture. So this is a huge event. Quite frankly, I don't remember 2017 having this kind of coverage as this one does. So to me, this one seems a lot bigger. I might be wrong. I mean, somebody who remembers the other one better might say that was just as big. I don't know, but it seems pretty big to me, that there seems to be a very large response to it. So if this is evidence of some kind of change in consciousness, like those dreams I had, then when I look at events in the US in particular, from a symbolic standpoint, I first kind of noticed this emergence of the new consciousness. I saw it in the event of 9/11, which I think I've mentioned some of before. Also saw it in the phenomenon, which was probably worldwide, of the Game of Thrones, right? That was also connected. I don't know what the dates of that were. I didn't think to look that up. But that was another event that I saw that would, had captured mass consciousness and was giving us information about what was coming. So in January of 2017, there was a worldwide protest. That was that Women's March. It was the largest protest in U.S. history. And worldwide, they estimate it was over 4 million. I think it was probably a lot more than that, because I think they said 3 to 5 something million in the U.S. So that would put worldwide way over that. But anyway, I mean, the fact that it was a U.S. event, but that it had spread throughout the world, again, is an indication that this is kind of really different. There's something about this that's not like a normal protest, or the size of it, the amount of people all over the world who actually did it together was really amazing. So what was that telling us was that the feminine is rising, right? That's the beginning of 2017. So we're seeing that as a possible indication, again, to the momentum of this eclipse. So then we have the pandemic, which I've talked about before as being about the union of the first and the seventh chakra, seventh being the above, first being the below, bringing those chakras together, an embodiment of that consciousness of spirit of the seventh chakra. So bringing those things together. Then we have the lockdown, which is where we had to turn inward. It was a time to go in. It was a time to assess. Where are we? What are we doing? How many fairy tales have we talked about where this happened? Rapunzel, the Handless Maiden, Sleeping Beauty, right? Over and over again, we had this period just like we just went through in, I guess it would have been, I don't remember what year it was, 2020, 2021, when that happened. Then we had an election, and then we had January 6th. So all these very big events, these kind of historic events, a lot of them happened in this one particular period. Now, my guides also brought in, which isn't the US, but France, which was one of the other events that I've looked at more closely, and that was Notre Dame. So if we look at that, that's the 0 point, is Notre Dame. Right outside the front of that cathedral is what they call the 0 point, and it's actually a spot on the ground. And if I remember correctly, it's something like it's the point at which everything is measured as like how far from this point, and how they measure things. So that was the cleansing of the feminine in Christianity. That was the symbolic information I got about that. And just such an amazing event, right? Where there was a witnessing of that, where the people stood and sang and watched it. And so witnessing in Christianity and in psychology is a big thing. So the final thing is to really be looking for evidence in yourself and in the culture of this new consciousness. So I think this is a bookend. I think this is the other end of this cycle, and that it will be interesting to see how, but the only way to bring out the new is to really see it. So the witnessing in Christianity is being able to hold the tension. So this is like Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary at the foot of the cross, right? That's the tension of the opposites, the above and the below and the in and out. And they witness, they stand in witness. And what happens is that it's transcending the ego consciousness. And then when that happens, the Holy of Holies is revealed, right? That would be the sixth chakra opens, and that's the solar eclipse. When there's this union, this harmonious union of this consciousness. So the more that we notice it, the more it will expand, and the more that we will see. So once you become aware of this, that what we're looking for is this emergence of the feminine and this balancing. That is what I believe. So like I said, it's a lot of information from a lot of sources coming in together. And so it's really going to be about letting it land, letting it gestate, like what's going to come out of this. When you bring together those two, like I said at the beginning, in the garden, that the sperm and the egg, it means something new is going to be born. And so that's what we're looking for as well. What is going to be born from this union of equality? And I think we might see something good, something, it's good. It's something that unites. It's something that brings together the opposites. So yeah, we'll be looking for those kinds of things, and anything that creates division, we're going to be looking to say, okay, we're going to hold the tension, be the witness, and allow the new information to come through us. And this is where it gets a little tricky and a little challenging at times, and to share it so that other people can see this is what's coming. This is the truth of what's happening. Well, I think I'm done. Like I said, I thought it might go over, but I really wanted to put it all in today, so that, because it's so timely, obviously. This eclipse is on Monday. So share with me any insights you've had, or if you get any information this week or in the months to come, you may be like, oh my God, this is what we talked about all, a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear if you get more information, or if these things come together, or you see it show up in your dreams, maybe. That's entirely possible too. Okay. Thank you very much for listening, if you're still here. And I hope you enjoy the eclipse. And I will be back next Saturday. Have a great week. Take care.